Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our fifth virtual water cooler series. Today, we're going to be talking about should we be thinking about going back to the office. So we will give everyone a couple more minutes to get logged in, and then we will get going. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please either just type them in the question box or the chat, and there's a couple different options there, or use the raise hand icon in the top left, I believe is where it is, and we can call on you to ask a question or answer a question. Thanks.
All right.
Okay, Frank, I think if we want to get going, go for it.
All right, perfect. Give me 1 second while I clear my throat. Hey everyone, welcome again. Obviously, I'm Frank Marino, and so this particular water series is going to be interesting because we've been talking about this internally now for some time as we've been working on. I think here at Forthright we're on week 7 or 8, I want to say, of remote work at this point, and I think many organizations are probably around the same mark. If, a week or two longer or shorter, somewhere around there. And so with the news, and I'm not going to talk about what's effective or not. The news about reopening coming up, and businesses are looking for a way to kind of get back to their new defined normal, or come back to the office. It brings the question as to whether or not we should be actually doing that, and also, if we are doing that, is it the same? Is it like a weekend? It just was a 8-week long weekend or not? And so we started pressing ideas around this, and kind of coming up with. We were leading up to this point with other water cooler series around, is remote work kind of what people are looking at going forward? What avenues people are doing to protect themselves, things like that. So some of the other water cooler series has kind of touched on that. But now we're at this point where we're 2 months in, and we're starting to now consider the ability of coming back to work. And so I first want to talk about the, from a purely what they call EQ, or employee emotional IQ kind of basis. And I wanted to, comment on everybody. Just the first thing you want to be thinking about is consider the people or the human element when you're considering this. As IT professionals and as leadership, we may not have the full say as some of the higher end executives may be making that call or whatnot. But I would ask that you guys, have a communication with your higher level executives, and think about, have some sort of outreach to different business units and the like, to understand their own ideas with that. A couple things to think about, though, are, just like the other, other industries that have any kind of high contact fields or things like that, there are so many areas to be considered of. For starters, are there going to be problems with people wearing masks inside the office? Is that going to cause some sort of a situation for those wearing the mask, those not wearing the mask, a combination of the two? I don't know if that's something that people are really thinking about, but I can promise you that that is something that people are going to be very curious about. And there's definitely going to be certain peer pressures, things like that, for depending on whoever's the winning party of that, right? Those with that versus those without. And you're going to create peer pressures for people. There's going to be some folks that just flat out don't care, and some that actually do. I can tell you my personal stance on this is, I myself, when I leave my house, I do wear my mask. You call me a germaphobe or whatever, that's fine. I just want to keep myself and my family safe. So I do the necessary precautions. You wear gloves, sanitizers, and all the like. That's just the way I look at that. So as you're thinking about that, make sure to be inclusionary of the people that would be considered of that. just for their own safety. Now, there are things that as an organization you can be working on. One of the things that I know that Forthright has been discussing at nauseum at this point in time is creating new protective elements, creating their own way of entry into the organization when you come into the building, ways to be tested for temperature, little things like that. I mean, I'm sure there's some rights violation that's going on in there, but hey, you know what? Our safety is probably more important than anything else. So that was a joke. People could laugh. That's all right. But there are solutions right now that people are working on these organizations to be able to provide a way to hands-free testing for not corona obviously, but hands-free testing for temperature and also sanitations and things of the like for proper safety. These things might be things you want to implement as an organization, not as a sales plug or whatever, but I do have some of my sales team on the call and or on this session, and they can definitely help you with some of those things. I know that we are looking at them ourselves, and I think they're pretty ingenious and not that ridiculous to have in your office considering the today's date or whatever. But consider something like that. Consider the idea of people wearing masks. Consider safety in general. When we started moving into different workspace designs for not only our own organization but others, you have people looking into the use of freeform workspaces. Maybe hot desking is something people call it, or hoteling. I don't know why they call it that, but those are some terms that people are using for the use of free floating spaces, right? Or public areas, conference rooms, things like that. You may want to consider how you're going to provide, or what kind of policies you're going to be communicating to people coming back to the office. Is it going to be a self-service kind of thing where everyone has to do it themselves? Just be considerate. The company will provide sanitation elements, wipe downs, that kind of stuff. And they'll be daily or multiple times a day, those kind of things. But I would make sure those policies or those guidelines are posted around. And it may seem excessive at first, but I think that the truth is sometimes people need to be reminded. You stop at a stop sign because there's a giant red stop sign there. It catches your eye. If that was just blended in with the sky, then you probably wouldn't stop. So I think that's a really good thing to kind of consider here, because there is that to be cognizant of. I think that people's feelings, people's situation, and everyone's going to take it differently. And so for those that are any kind of supervisor or manager on this session, I want you to take that in consideration. You may not be fully aware of everyone's personal situation and what this could have caused to their families and whatnot. And so, just be considerate of how you're asking people to rejoin or reassemble into the workforce. Now, that was a lot of, personal safety, things like that. Let's talk about the organization as a whole, right? The organizational safety. And there are some things that I think are important for an organization to consider, because some of the remote strategies or the remote work strategies that have been implemented were at the, I don't want to say negligence, that's definitely not the case. We took a blind eye to a lot of security measures that normally, if you were to try to implement something like that during a pre-COVID world, you'd probably have InfoSec or IT security, depending on what you call it internally, breathing down your neck at all kinds of times. Evidently, that has been, especially even in high regulatory areas, have been lifted, we'll call it that, and have now introduced a whole slew of risks that the organization may or may not have been ready for or are fully prepared for. Now, this is an area where IT is, hugely involved in, and I think that as the enablers of all this technology, these are kind of the things that I want to focus on as my second half here. But prior to that, I just want to take a quick poll of a couple things here. Chris, could you pull up the first poll? I want to get a temperature of the room in terms of where people are at.
Yes, I can. So the first poll is, are there ongoing conversations within your organization regarding returning to the office? Oops, so the office at the end of that, it's going to cut off.
Alrighty.
Okay, close
got
it
it
out.
good there.
Yep. And
Now, guys, this was obviously a warm-up vote in terms of that. I just wanted to get people involved. Obviously, I'd assumed that there was some sort of conversation. I was more interested if there was somebody that was clearly not having this conversation more than anything else. Let's go to the next one.
Okay. Next one. Are you discussing security concerns involved with returning to the office? It's more of a split on this one.
Yeah, it does look like that. All right. Oh, I like this. We're going to touch a lot of this, guys. Oof, this is good stuff. Good stuff. Let's finish off with the last one.
Okay. Are there conversations about staying remote?
I like this one a lot personally.
I think a lot of people are maybe talking about some kind of hybrid, possibly.
Yeah, I don't think that I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all scenario. But ooh, I like that. I like that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for those. That really helps me kind of picture this, and it really touches on some of the things that we're talking about here. So when we're talking about safety or security now, we address the safety concern. Let's talk about security. So some of the strategies that were used for remote work were, I'm just going to rattle off a few, and we talked about it actually within one of our first water series. We have people using some sort of VDI or desktop as a service technology, Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, you name it. There's several out there that you can use. This is people using probably a personal device and using that personal device to then communicate to the backend network, right? And this is a great form of communication because this creates theoretically a secure tunnel into your environment, and this is this was a really good way to answer this call. Now, unfortunately, some people were not prepared for that type of load, or not prepared for that in from a total DR, essentially 100% users. And so what ended up occurring is that a lot of folks used the expansion of their VDI environment into the cloud. And this is a great idea. I was supporting this quite a bit as we started our own. Forthright uses VDI as well for our remote workers. And the problem with this was that typically you'd go through well out designs in terms of expanding your environment into the cloud. You establish cloud governance policies as how you're going to manage that, the security elements within that, and so forth and so on, right? However, when your CEO calls you and tells you, hey, I need to have 100% of my users be able to work remotely, and oh, I need that by tomorrow, and it's Friday. So obviously that is that's an exaggeration to a certain degree, but the truth is I think a lot of people felt like that was the situation they were in. And so shortcuts were made. There's no doubt about it. And quite frankly, function over the securities and things like that were taken to priority. And I'm sure that during the current 7, 8, 6 weeks, wherever you are at in this mode, that you did your absolute best as an IT professional or your IT team or management and started to bring up these concerns and try to address them. However, you were probably met with don't touch it from the business, because obviously they're working, it's obviously limited working, and everyone's just trying to, for all intents and purposes, survive. And I don't mean that from a life or death situation, I meant more from an organizational perspective, right? Trying to maintain whatever workloads and things like that. And any kind of impact of that would be excruciating painful because the virus already did that for you. So what that did was that puts a situation where now, your expansion, your environment is now, you have a weak point. And with any weak point, especially one in cloud, for those who aren't aware, cloud is public. And there are a lot of avenues to reach your systems on cloud. Now, to be very clear, I'm a huge cloud proponent. I think that is the way for everyone. I mean that, with very, very few exceptions. However, it has to be done and planned correctly. I promise you, your cloud providers are investing a lot more money than most organizations are in terms of their security elements. You just have to be able to take advantage of them, which is probably not what folks did. So is you're introducing people now coming back into the office, as you guys have all heard, breaches take somewhere between, I want to say, Last figure was like 180 days for know that a breach occurred or how long something has been manifesting in your environment. So, you're 2 months in. So I would say August, September timeframe, we're probably going to see a rise of organizations having some sort of concern or some sort of impact by some of the leniencies within their security rules and policies. So just take that into consideration. You may want to consider things like adding some sort of vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, those kind of things to your return plan, if you will. That doesn't necessarily involve end users, but that is something that you want to consider. Now, I mentioned, I gave the example of a VDI environment. This creates a foothold of certain areas of security. Some plans are a little different. Some plans were just VPN connections. Now, these could be controlled similarly to that of a VDI session, where only certain ports and things like that can be accessed. However, you are accessing it from a personal device, and you do have direct access to that personal device. So depending on how you lock down your VPN or not, hopefully you did lock that down, it creates avenues where whatever that user's personal device was doing and how that can traverse your network and what that may mean, again, for what to do. Now, in this case, though, it's not an expansion of your environment. It's probably accessing an existing environment. And therefore, that is definitely something to be cognizant of. And the same things that I mentioned about, vulnerability scanning and, maybe some sort of SIM solution or SIEM, however you want to pronounce it. Those type of things should be considered to be put in place if you don't already have them, to try to be aware of what's going on. At this point in time, I would make the argument that if you were impacted, you're already impacted, and it's really more of getting aware and how you can nip it in the bud from mitigate that standpoint. I would have a hard time believing that there are further implications other than that to deal with using these particular methods, because it is we're working off the notion that somebody can traverse or back hole that you created because of some of your expansion plans to handle your user load for your DR plans and things like that. Now, those are some of the better case scenarios. Unfortunately, I have heard some really interesting plans of how people handle their work remotely policy. And in some cases, and if this is you, please, this is in no way me a poke fun or anything like that. I'm in no person to judge about this. It's just I would have done it different ways. Let's just call it that. But there are situations where I've heard organizations, big and small, taking their computers from work, their company corporate asset, and literally taking that home with them per the organization's ask. And now they have a corporate device sitting at home inside of a unsecured network, a completely untrusted network. And in many cases, you have little ones at home and mommy and daddy's computer. Look, that may have been a little fear mongering, but to a certain extent, that is a reality. And I would be hard pressed to believe that a lot of organizations who did allow for these corporate assets to leave the environment, whether or not they were tracked accordingly. Like they may know that corporate asset is supposed to be in the accounting department, and they may know who last logged into it and use that information as a way to say, oh, that's Sally, and she's in accounting, and that's her asset. But there may be a situation where that didn't happen, and you don't have the necessary asset management solutions to be able to determine, hey, this is Sally's computer. So now, and I don't mean to poke fun at Sally, but you could have a situation where you're now going to bring these devices back into the environment, to your trusted environment, and if not taken through some sort of an ingest process, some sort of way to determine that these are clean or have been been validated by some IT professional, this could put the organization at risk. And I think that IT professionals, if this was your strategy, whether you provided laptops, took your PCs home, whatever that is, if you're taking a device out of the network and plugging it into some sort of personal home network and then taking that back into your network, I would assume that device is absolutely dirty in every way, shape, form, and you should treat it as such. I would implore that you tell your executives that, and please come up with a plan on how to handle that. What I would recommend in such a short amount of time, I would tell you that creating some sort of a depot where they could be scanned or quarantined in some form, or if you do have things like SIM or an IPS solution, IDS solution, to just put a heightened flag or scanning within the networks that these devices are going into. And if their networks are not segmented for whatever reason, shame on you, first off. And then secondly, segment them so that they are protected as much as possible. That would be something to consider. If you are resting on the fact that you had agents or some sort of antivirus or something like that on these devices, I want to say congratulations. I think that's a great effort. But unfortunately, what a lot of these hackers and bad actors are doing is taking advantage of users using personal devices, using corporate assets for personal actions. And in many cases, these solutions, AV and the like, are not protecting the use of that in a at-home setting. They were predominantly being considered by the corporate firewall or the corporate content management solution or web filtering solution, which is no longer accessible unless you are probably doing some combination of VPNing and the like. But regardless, keep that in consideration. And so what a lot of bad actors are considering here are taking advantage of your personal information and tying it back to now your work device, your work email, and some combination of that. I think you're going to see a significant number of breaches or security concerns on the rise, probably in that August and September timeframe, because just how that works. And if there was something dropped on those devices that would be non-lethal of any kind, but once are in your network, can be lethal. I mean, I think data leakage would be something that you should be concerned with. So we are at the top of this half hour-ish, and I want to give room for questions and open discussion. I think that we've covered a lot of topics here, both on the employee side and Chris, I think you muted me. So what I meant to do was to say that this is now the open form of our virtual water cooler series, and I ask you guys to please raise your hands and provide any comments regarding the stuff that I talked about, or questions around your own strategy if you'd like some sort of semi-expert advice. Well, I'm not an expert out there returning to work. I do work a lot. If you would like to speak, all you need to do is do the raise hand icon, or drop something in the chat, or post a question in the question box, and go from there. I want to say it's pronounced Igor, but is it pronounced Igor? Can we unmute Igor? It looked like he had his hand up.
I'm trying. Yes, he might just do it on his side too.
Oh, okay. You are self-muted. Okay. All right. Oh, come on, guys. No takers.
Oh, there's Nelson.
Nelson. Good, man.
Hey, how you doing, Frank?
You're unmuted. How are you, man? How's life?
Good. Quite busy, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Just to bring up one of the things that we're considering doing in the return to work scenario is we're actually, in order to keep the social distance type thing going, well, we're looking at doing an A team, B team, and doing alternating days with alternating Fridays between teams to kind of spread it out. That's also going to be with the caveat that if you're over a certain age, or you have a complicated situation medically or even personally, then you'll be exempted and don't need to go. You just need to stay on top of your items and in communication with your manager.
This is really great, Nelson. I actually have heard this a few times now from different organizations. So you're definitely not alone. And I've seen this now being done with organizations of any size you could possibly imagine. And sometimes they've even taken it as far as creating an ABC team, especially for shift-based workers and things like that. And the alternating Fridays, I think that's kind of nice, almost like a perk, if you will.
Yeah.
I would say be careful about calling it return to work, because that implies people are not working.
Yeah.
So,
Return to the
just thought
workplace.
there you go. There you go. There you go. Just something to consider.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Nelson.
Right.
Are there any other practices that you're doing that you'd like to share?
Well, the ones that applied on the IT side is specifically that, because being that we're a medical center and the centers already have their own practices, the most of the times it's not applicable to everybody. But
Right.
regardless, we're still going to do the scan for temperature prior to come in. So you have to get scanned upon entrance, and you have a little sticker on your badge to make sure you're cleared. Anybody shows any sign of sickness, you're done, go home, work remote. And that's, just protect everybody.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's interesting. The sticker is something that I think is really interesting. It creates some sort of indicator. These folks have been, quote unquote, cleared for entry or whatnot. I like that, some sort of identification.
Yeah, a different color every day, so there's no confusion.
I like that. Yeah, no, that's really nice. That's really nice. I think there's a lot that other organizations can learn from what the healthcare providers are doing. They're, the people in the front lines are definitely going through a lot right now. I have a lot of friends and family that are in the healthcare field, and I will say that I do not envy them. I have a personal friend of mine, a longtime friend, whose wife works in at the hospital, and her floor is one of the COVID care centers. And while there's not just bodies lying everywhere or anything like that, but the media would like you to believe, it's still a scary place. And they have to have different change of clothing, different shoes. I mean,
right.
It's unbelievable. Actually, one of them once told me that if you want the safest place to be, it's going to be on the hallway of one of these COVID halls, because it's cleaned every 5 seconds, and you have to change your clothes like on a regular, like every 5 seconds. You're taking showers, all kinds of stuff. It's really the level of effort they went through is pretty amazing. So, all right, Nelson, thank you, and Chris definitely has something special for you that she'll be distributing. So thank you for answering. Come on, folks. I have 1 minute exactly before I hit the half-hour mark, and I welcome anybody else to comment or drop a line. If you have any feedback or anything like that you'd like us to have, please let me know. I would love to make these better for everyone. Next week's conversation is, Chris, do you remember the next one?
It's on measurements of for productivity.
Oh, yes. So up until this point, we've been talking about a bunch of stuff around remoting and the safety and things like that. And one question that has come up, and I'll make a plug for my next week, is we've been asked about how to measure productivity. And so this obviously is a touchy subject. And I want to say a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 water coolers ago, someone asked something around productivity management software. And I think that's one of the areas that inspired this topic. So if you're interested in understanding how you could manage productivity or just have some measurement of that, I highly recommend you join next week. Please be on the lookout for any follow-up emails regarding this session and others. We have a blog post that goes on after this that goes into more details about what we covered today. If you missed it, feel free to show someone the link or the blog. They're all welcome. And I believe the recordings are going to be made available to everybody if they're not already. Chris can probably
They're all posted on our YouTube channel. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So check us out there. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, I highly recommend that you do so. And you get to check out more of my lovely COVID beer. Anyways, guys, I really appreciate you all joining me today, and please stay safe for you and your families. Have a good one. And if there's anything you need us to add to our water cooler series, please reach out to us. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.